Hey YouTube, this is PrimetimePokemon. In this video, I'll be reviewing my Glaceon GX deck. Now this is another deck review that I'm doing for the 2018 Standard Format. In the description of this video, you'll find the playlist that I've created for all of the competitive TCG deck reviews that I've done on my channel. I've also done a video series on how to build a competitive deck that you may also find useful. You'll find a link to that in the description of this video as well. So this video will be laid out the same as all of the other deck reviews that I've done on my channel. I'll give a simplified strategy for this deck to start. I'll show the deck checklist on the screen in the middle, and then a majority of this video, I'll be going through each and every card in this deck, stating why the card is in the deck, as well as how I use that card. So this Glaceon GX deck is the second Ultra Prism based deck that I've built on my channel. I did do a Duskmane Necrozma GX deck review video a couple of weeks back. That deck is much more powerful. The strategy behind this Glaceon GX deck is to get Glaceon GX in the active Pokemon spot, utilizing its ability, making your opponent unable to use the abilities of their GX or EX Pokemon. Now this can affect things like Tapu Lele GX, so you try and prevent your opponent from using Tapu Lele GX to get the supporter they want into their hand. Also, things like Lycanroc GX, that ability on the card will not work, making Glaceon GX get switched out of the active Pokemon spot. Gardevoir GX is very popular. Its Secret Spring ability will not work when Glaceon is in the active Pokemon spot. So ideally, this is a two-hit knockout deck, but you want to get Eevee into the active Pokemon spot to start the game, attach a water energy to it using its ability to immediately evolve into Glaceon. And then you want to get, ideally, two Zoroark GX set up on your bench to use that card as a draw mechanism. That way you can continuously get more cards into your hand and then make it even harder on your opponent. I have lots of trainer cards in this deck that either put less cards into my opponent's hand or remove energy from my opponent's Pokemon. So both Glaceon and Zoroark GX would be the primary attackers. The weakness here is that Glaceon is weak to Metal-type Pokemon. Of course, Duskmane Necrozma GX and Dialga GX, two very popular Metal-type Pokemon. And then Zoroark GX is weak to Fighting-type Pokemon. So of course, Buzzwole GX, Lucario GX, and even Lycanroc GX you're going to be weak to. But for the most part, this is a frustrating deck to play against, and if you can get Glaceon GX into the active Pokemon spot right away, it can really frustrate your opponent and really stall their strategy, allowing them not to attack or really get any of their Pokemon set up. So on the screen you can see the deck checklist. 15 total Pokemon in this deck, 33 trainers, so a little bit heavy on the trainer cards, and then 12 energy, 8 basic water, and 4 double colorless. Ideally, you want to use Puzzle of Time to get the double colorless back from your discard pile. I do see a lot of enhanced hammers being used out there, so a lot of times I'll have Glaceon GX set up, and then my opponent will use the enhanced hammer and discard that double colorless energy. Same goes for Zoroark GX. Ideally, you just put the one double colorless energy on that card to attack. That's what I use Puzzle of Time mainly for, is to get those double colorless energy back into my hand and reuse those. Of course, you could also use something like Special Charge to get those special energy cards back into your deck. But now I'll go through all of the Pokemon trainers and energy in this deck. First up would be the main attacking line. I use a 4-3 line of Eevee and Glaceon. This Eevee is from the Sun and Moon base set. This is a special holo of that card, but the main reason I use this specific Eevee is for its energy evolution. It says, when you attach a basic energy card from your hand to this Pokemon during your turn, you may search your deck for a card that evolves from this Pokemon that's the same type as that energy card, put it onto this Pokemon to evolve it. Then shuffle your deck. So ideally you go first if you win the coin flip to start the game, and you can evolve Eevee into Glaceon the very first turn. 4 copies of Eevee, just to make sure that I can get Eevee in the active Pokemon spot to start the game. And then I used 3 copies of Glaceon GX. This is from the Ultra Prism set. It was a very hyped up card coming into Ultra Prism pre-releases. This card isn't as good, I think, as people had thought originally, but it does have merit for a deck being built around this card. So 200 HP, which is a solid HP, 1 ability, and 2 moves. Freezing Gaze is its ability. It says, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, your opponent's Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX in play, in their hand and in their discard pile have no abilities, except for Freezing Gaze. So you put this card into the active Pokemon spot, it disables abilities on the GX or EX cards. Unfortunately, it doesn't disable things like Magnezone from Ultra Prism or Octillery, any type of draw mechanism like that, but Zoroark GX is very popular. I mentioned some other popular abilities on GX cards in the open that prevents those abilities from being used. I would say the biggest advantage to this card is it prevents your opponent from using Tapu Lele GX's ability. And then Frost Bullet for 3 energy cards, 2 if you use a double colorless, does 90 damage plus 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So this is a 2-hit knockout deck like I mentioned. Ideally, you try and do 30 damage to something like a Tapu Lele on your opponent's bench. That way, if they move that card into the active Pokemon spot, or you Guzman that card into the active Pokemon spot, and if you have a choice band on Glaceon, you can use Polar Spear GX and do 180 damage, which would knock out something like a Tapu Lele GX in 1 move. Then Polar Spear GX is its GX attack for the same energy requirements as Frost Bullet. It says, this attack does 50 damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So you can use Frost Bullet first to spread damage around, and then pick and choose where you want to use Polar Spear GX. But for the most part, you're going to be using Frost Bullet. And it is a 2-hit knockout deck. 180 damage in 2 turns will knock out a lot of GX or EX cards. Or if you can do 120 damage per turn with a choice band, 240 damage in 2 turns will knock out pretty much everything. Next up would be a 3-3 line of Zorua and Zoroark GX. Zorua is from the Shining Legends set. This is a card that I use. 60 HP, which is solid. Ram for 1 double colorless energy does 20 damage. For the most part, I just want to put this card on the bench and use Zoroark's ability from the bench. And then Zoroark GX is from the Shining Legends set. You also can get the Zoroark GX as a full art promo from the Shining Legends collection box featuring Zoroark GX. Its ability Trade is the main reason to use this card. It says, once during your turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. So this is the main way to draw cards using a Pokemon's ability in this deck. The card does have a very high HP, so if you are forced to put this card into the active Pokemon spot, it should last quite a while. But again, the strategy with this deck is to make your opponent unable to attack or get their Pokemon set up so you can get the cards you need in your hand with Trade. And then Puzzle of Time can be used with this card. Puzzle of Time allows you to look at the top 3 cards of your deck and arrange them in any order, similar to how Mallow is used as well. So this card combined with Puzzle of Time is very good using its Trade ability. And then Righteous Beating does do 20 damage for each of your Pokemon in play, so it can do a maximum of 120 damage if you have a full bench for 1 double colorless energy card, 150 damage if you have a choice band attached. So again, this is a 2-hit knockout card. The final Pokemon I used would be Tapu Lele GX. This is from the Guardians Rising set. I used just the 2 copies of this card. For the most part, I can find what I need with the Trade ability on Zoroark GX. Tapu Lele GX, 170 HP. I really don't use this card as an attacker. It does have an advantage of not having a weakness, and its Energy Drive move for 1 double colorless energy does do 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to both Pokemon. The main reason, of course, you want to use Tapu Lele GX in the deck is for its Wonder Tag ability. When you place this card from your hand to your bench, you can search your deck for a supporter card and put it into your hand. So again, if you have Glaceon GX in your active Pokemon spot and your opponent tries to play this card, the ability on the card will be prevented. So that is it for the Pokemon. Like I mentioned, the strategy in this deck is to just get Glaceon GX in your active Pokemon spot as quickly as possible. Next up would be the trainer cards. 33 total trainer cards in this deck. I'll go through the supporters first. 15 supporters I use in this deck. First up would be Supporter N. The newest set to feature this card would be Fates Collide. I used 3 copies of this card. It says, each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck. Then each player draws a card for each of his or her remaining prize cards. So at the beginning of the game, you can get 6 cards into your hand right away, and it shuffles your own hand back into your deck. So that way, if you are using Zoroark's trade ability and continuously drawing cards from your deck, it will replenish your deck to make sure you don't lose a game. And then later in games, if your opponent is beating you, it can limit the amount of cards your opponent gets into their hand. So 3 copies of Supporter N. I use 2 copies of Acerol. This is from the Burning Shadow set. It says, put one of your Pokemon that has any damage counters on it and all cards attached to it into your hand. So I use this on the GX cards in this deck mainly, Glaceon and Zoroark, because both have fairly high HP. They can usually take attack or 2, and then you can use Acerola to immediately retreat that Pokemon from the active Pokemon spot and move it back to your hand. Then, if you have another Zorua or an Eevee on your bench, you can just put down that Stage 1 Pokemon you just put back into your hand, immediately back into play. Brigitte is next. I use 2 copies of Brigitte. This is from the Breakthrough set. Ideally, at the start of the game, you want to use this. You use Ultra Ball or Tapu Lele to get to this card. It says, search your deck for 1 basic Pokemon EX or 3 basic Pokemon and put them on your bench. Shuffle your deck afterwards. So if I do use this card, ideally I have 2 of each, Eevee and Zorua, in play. So if I start the game with Eevee in the active Pokemon spot, then I use this card to get 1 Eevee and 2 Zorua. That way, during my second turn, I can evolve up to 4 Pokemon at once. Cynthia, which is from the Ultra Prism set. This, of course, is the full art version of Cynthia. I use 2 of this card. This is similar to N, but it says shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. Because I want to affect my opponent with this deck, that's why I use more N than I do Cynthia. But again, the same reason I want to replenish my deck here because of Zoroark GX's trade ability. Guzman is next. I use 2 Guzman. Switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. If you do, switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. And I use this card, like I mentioned with Glaceon GX, I may do 30 damage to something like a Tapu Lele GX on my opponent's bench. Then I can Guzman that Pokemon into the active Pokemon spot and knock it out in one move with Glaceon GX's GX attack. Professor Sycamore is next. I also use 2 Professor Sycamore. Discard your hand and draw 7 cards. So at times, it is better not to replenish your opponent's hand and have them get more cards into their hand. Or if you have maybe 1 or 2 cards in your hand and you're perfectly fine discarding those cards, this card does get 1 more card than potentially both Supporter N and Cynthia. And then I do use 2 Team Flare Grunt. This is from the Generation set. It says, discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. I also use Enhanced Hammer, but I like this one because it doesn't specify a basic or a special energy. So I can discard a double colorless energy or a rainbow energy. It really doesn't matter with this card. The only caveat is it has to be on your active Pokemon of your opponents. It can't be on your opponent's bench. Next up here would be the item cards that I use. 18 total item and tool cards. First up would be Puzzle of Time. This is from the Breakpoint set. I use 4 copies of this card. It says you may play 2 Puzzle of Time cards at once. If you played 1 card, look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. And then if you play 2 cards, put 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. So the first option you can use with Zoroark GX's trade ability. And then the second option, like I mentioned in the open, you can put 2 cards down of Puzzle of Time and then move 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. It's useful to get things like a supporter card that you want to use back into your hand or the special energy back into your hand and make it seem like you have more than 4 double colorless energy in your deck. Next up would be Ultra Ball. I use 4 copies of Ultra Ball. It is important to get Zoroark, Tapu, Lele, and Glaceon GX in play. Get those Pokemon evolved, the basic Pokemon like Zorua and then Eevee. And Ultra Ball is a quick way to do that. Again, you are discarding cards when you have to use this card, but this is important at the beginning of the game to not only get Eevee in play, but to get Tapu Lele GX as well, to get to Brigitte. Floatstone is next. I believe the newest set to feature Floatstone would be the Breakthrough set. It says, the Pokemon this card is attached to has no retreat cost. So both Zoroark GX and Glaceon GX have a 2 colorless energy retreat cost, so you can either use Guzman or Floatstone to retreat those Pokemon for free. I use 3 Floatstones in this deck. Choice Band would be next. 2 Choice Band. This is a tool card as well. It says the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon GX or active Pokemon EX. And I talked about this deck being a 2-hit knockout deck. So you're going to want to increase damage when attacking powerful Pokemon like GX or EX cards by using a Choice Band trainer and increasing attacks by 30. This is from the Guardians Rising set. I used 2 copies of this card. And then I used 2 copies of Enhanced Hammer. This is also from the Guardians Rising set. It says, discard a special energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. So I use this as an item card. I do like that you can discard a special energy from any of your opponent's Pokemon, not necessarily the active Pokemon. So this card combined with Team Flare Grunt, I can frustrate my opponent by removing their energy. And then I use 2 red cards. This is from the Generation set. It says your opponent shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck and draws 4 cards. So again, a way to frustrate the opponent, putting less cards into their hand. If it is at the beginning of the game, maybe even the first turn, you can have them get 4 cards into their hand instead of the more than likely 6 that they have. And then the last item card that I have here would be Field Blower. Just 1 copy of this card. This is from the Guardians Rising set. It says, choose up to 2 in any combination of Pokemon tool cards and stadium cards in play and discard them. So a lot of times, opponents will have something like Choice Band or Fighting Fury Belt or Floatstone. This is a good card to use to get rid of those. It also gets rid of stadium cards like a Parallel City, which may hurt this deck quite a bit if you're trying to use Zoroark GX in the active Pokemon spot. So that is really it for the trainer cards. Again, I'm trying to find ways to manipulate my opponent's hand and remove energy from their Pokemon. As far as energy cards go, I use 8 basic water energy and then 4 double colorless energy for a total of 12 energy cards. And for the most part, all of the Pokemon I'm going to attack with in this deck just require 1 water energy and then 1 double colorless energy at the very most. So for the most part, this is a quick attacking deck. It is a 2-hit knockout deck, but it can really frustrate your opponent if you get Glaceon GX out there right away. It can turn off abilities on the GX and EX cards, and then you can quickly use Zoroark GX ability to get the cards you want into your hand. So definitely take a look at this deck if you're interested in a water type deck, preventing abilities on GX or EX cards similar to what Garbodor can do, and then just doing a lot of damage per turn, at least with a 2-hit knockout deck like this, that both Glaceon and Zoroark GX can do at least 90 damage per turn with a full bench. So there you have it. Thanks everyone for watching. As always, before you go, check out all the links in the description of this video, including links to my blog, Facebook, and Twitter pages. As always, if you have any decks you'd like me to review on my channel, please let me know. Otherwise, thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.